It was November 1943, Saint-Nazaire, France, the 7th U-boat flotilla. I was 22 years old, but if you looked at my eyes, you would have guessed 50. I was a Maschinenmaat, a petty officer machinist. My world was not the open ocean. My world was the engine room of a Type VII-C U-boat, U-96, or maybe U-200. The numbers didn't matter. The iron coffin was the same. People have this romantic idea of the U-boat arm, the gray wolves. They see the newsreels, the clean white caps, the captains looking through periscopes with a scarf blowing in the wind. They don't show you the reality. They don't show you the bucket. They don't record the smell. That is the first thing you lose, your sense of smell. Or rather, it is the first thing that conquers you. Imagine a small garage, a one-car garage. Now, pack 50 grown men inside it. Do not let them shower for 6 weeks. Add the reek of diesel oil, which is everywhere. It is in the air, in your clothes, in your hair. Add the smell of molding bread. Add the sharp, stinging scent of lemon from the air purifiers that never really worked. Add the bilge water, a soup of oil, seawater, and urine sloshing under the floorboards. Now, seal that garage airtight and heat it to 35 degrees Celsius. That was the atmosphere. We called it U-boat sweat. It condensed on the cold steel hull. It dripped on your face while you slept. It dripped into the food. After 3 days at sea, you couldn't smell it anymore. You were part of it. But when you opened a hatch after a patrol, the fresh air didn't smell good. It smelled like burning. It hurt. The Atlantic in November is not an ocean. It is a moving mountain range. We spent most of our time on the surface. We had to. The diesels needed air. We needed speed. The Type VII-C was not designed to float on top of the waves. It was designed to cut through them. But in a force 9 gale, you don't cut. You get smashed. The boat would roll 45 degrees. Think about that. Stand in your living room. Now tilt the floor until the wall is almost below you. That was our life for weeks. You couldn't walk. You climbed. You didn't eat from a plate. You ate from a tin can held tight in your hand, bracing your legs against the bulkhead. If you were on the bridge watch, you were lashed to the railing with a leather belt. If the belt broke, you were gone. And we didn't turn back. The captain, the old man, who was usually 24 years old, would not risk the boat for one man. The ocean wanted us dead long before the British did. The cold was absolute. Inside the boat it was humid and hot near the engines, but damp and freezing in the bow. My bunk was in the aft torpedo room for a while. We practiced hot bunking, 2 men, 1 bunk. When the other guy got up for his watch, you climbed into his wet, warm sweat. The mattress was always damp. The blankets were damp. You learned to sleep in the fetal position, knees to chest, to conserve heat. And the noise. On the surface, the twin-man diesel engines were deafening, a constant hammering roar, vibration. It rattled your teeth. It loosened the fillings in your mouth. You had to shout to be heard, but when we dove, that was when the real enemy arrived. Silence. My station was the electric motor room. When we submerged, the diesels were useless. They needed air. So we switched to the electrics. Siemens Schuckert motors, silent, powerful, but heavy. My job was to nurse them. I carried a flashlight with a red lens. White light ruined your night vision, and in the boat we lived in perpetual twilight. I wore the U-boot pection, the leather gear, gray leather jacket, gray leather trousers. They were stiff as boards when they dried, but they were never dry. They were lined with wool, but the oil soaked through. My hands were permanently black, grease, carbon. We didn't have fancy diagnostic computers. We had our ears. I listened to the hum of the shaft. A slight grinding, a bearing is going. A shudder? Maybe kelp on the propeller. We relied on the depth gauge, the Papenburg. It was a glass tube with a bubble. It showed us our trim. If that bubble moved too fast, we were dying, and we carried the Tauchretter, the escape lung, a rubber bag with a potash cartridge to scrub CO2. We were trained to use it to escape from a sunken boat. But we all knew the truth. If you are down at 200 meters and the hull cracks, you don't put on a mask. You don't do anything. The water pressure enters at the speed of a bullet. It cuts you in half. Or it compresses the air in the boat so fast that the heat incinerates you. The Tauchretter was a comfort object, a lie we told ourselves. If we sink, we can swim up. No, you can't. It was day 14 of the patrol. We were chasing a convoy, HX something. We had been shadowed for hours. The captain decided to risk a surface attack at night. We were running full ahead, both diesels screaming. The boat was surging through the swell foam washing over the conning tower. I was in the engine room oiling the rockers. Then the alarm. A-A-L-A-R-M. It wasn't a drill. You can tell by the tone of the bell. It sounds frantic. And the angle. The captain screamed, "Alarm! Fluten!" The vents opened. The boat pitched forward, violently. I was thrown against the diesel block. The engines cut out. The sudden silence was sickening. Then the electrics engaged. We were diving, fast, too fast. "Angle down 30!" someone shouted. Dishes crashed in the galley. A crate of lemons broke open and rolled down the walkway like yellow stones. We hit 60 meters in seconds. The hull groaned. Creak! That sound. It's the sound of steel adjusting to pressure. It sounds like a giant stepping on a dry twig. We leveled off at 80 meters. "Silent running," the chief whispered. "Schleichfahrt." This is where the war becomes personal. We shut down everything, the ventilation fans, the heaters, the bilge pumps. We became a steel hole in the water. I took off my boots. We all did. We walked in heavy wool socks. You move like a ghost. If you drop a wrench, clang. That sound travels through the water for miles. The destroyer on the surface has a hydrophone. He is listening. If he hears that wrench, he kills you. So you freeze. You breathe shallow. You become a statue. Here is the rule of the underwater war. Trust the math, not your fear. The captain is doing trigonometry in his head. Speed of sound, depth, temperature layers. The water in the Atlantic has layers. Thermal layers. Cold water is denser. If you can get under a cold layer, the sonar bounces off it. It hides you. So we hunted for the cold. We watched the thermometer like it was the face of God. Passing 100 meters, temperature dropping. Hold at 120. We sat there, hovering. The air in the boat began to foul. With the fans off, the CO2 builds up. You get a headache, a band of steel tightening around your forehead. You get sleepy, but you cannot sleep. If you sleep, you might snore. If you snore, 50 men might die. So you pinch yourself. You bite your lip until it bleeds. You stare at the rivets in the overhead. You count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you hear it. Ping. It is a soft sound, almost gentle, like a spoon hitting a wine glass. Ping. It's the active sonar from the destroyer. ASDIC. He has found us. The sound gets louder. Ping. It feels like it is hitting your own skull. The captain signals, "Rig for depth charges." You don't run. You don't panic. You grab a pipe. You brace your feet. You unlock your knees so the shock doesn't break your legs. You open your mouth slightly. Why? To equalize the pressure. If the shock wave hits and your mouth is closed, your eardrums burst. So we stood there, mouths open, like idiots, waiting to die. The first pattern landed. 3 charges, whoom, whoom, whoom. The boat didn't just shake, it was kicked. The lights shattered. Darkness. Then the emergency lights flickered on. Dim blue. Dust fell from the ceiling, cork insulation, paint chips. It coated us like snow. I was thrown into the switchboard. Sparks showered down. "Leaks!" the report came from the bow. "Torpedo tube 1 is weeping." Water was spraying in. High-pressure water is not like a tap. It is a laser. It cuts. The torpedo mechaniker threw himself at the valve. He cranked it, screaming with effort. We were heavy in the bow, sinking. 150 meters, the navigator whispered. 160. 170. The hull popped, loud bangs, like gunshots. Bang! Bang! That is the rivets shearing. We were going deeper than the boat was built for. The manual says the crush depth is maybe 200 meters. We were passing 190. I looked at the depth gauge in the motor room. The needle was in the red. I looked at the boy next to me. Klaus. He was 19. He was crying, silently, tears running down his black, oily face. He didn't make a sound. He knew the rule. Silence is life. If he screamed, the chief would have knocked him out with a wrench. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival. So Klaus cried without a sound. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. We held hands in the dark, listening to the destroyer propellers overhead. Chug, 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 chug. They sounded like a train running right over our heads. Another pattern dropped. Closer. The shock wave hit us like a sledgehammer. The boat tilted upward. Stern down. Oil cans flew across the room. I heard a crack. A rib in the hull? A pipe? I didn't know. We just hung on. For 6 hours. 6 hours of pinging. 6 hours of explosions. We couldn't move. We couldn't speak. We just breathed the foul, thick air and waited for the end. We survived. I don't know why. Maybe the destroyer ran out of depth charges. Maybe the thermal layer hit us. We limped back to the surface hours later. When the hatch opened, I climbed up. The night was clear. The air, God, the air. I vomited. My lungs were so used to the poison. The fresh air felt like acid. I lay on the deck casing, looking at the stars. The boat was battered. The railings were twisted. But we were alive. We made it back to St. Nazaire. They gave us medals, the Iron Cross. They gave us fresh fruit. They gave us leave. I went home to Hamburg for 2 weeks, but I wasn't there. I was walking down the street and a car backfired. Bang! And I was back in the dark. I fell to the pavement, hands over my head, mouth open. People stared. They didn't understand. They saw a young man in a uniform, a hero. They didn't see the steel coffin. They didn't smell the diesel. They didn't know that part of me was still down there at 200 meters, waiting for the hull to crush. I am old now. The war has been over for 40 years. I live in a house with big windows. I keep them open. I cannot stand stagnant air. If I smell diesel at a gas station or from a truck, I panic. My heart races. My hands shake. I can feel the roll of the boat. I can hear the water rushing and the silence. That is what I fear most. Absolute silence. Because in the silence, you hear the things you tried to forget. You hear the hull popping. You hear Klaus crying. You hear the ping. People ask me, was it worth it? Were you brave? I tell them. We weren't brave. We were trapped. We were technicians of our own survival. We did a job. The job was to keep the water out. And we failed. Not because the boat sank, but because the water got in anyway. It got into our minds. It drowned us, even though we were breathing. I look at the ocean now, and I don't see beauty. I see a lid, a heavy gray lid covering a dark, cold hell. And I know that down there, in the deep, there are still boats, iron coffins, filled with boys who never got old, resting in the silence. Let me tell you about the fish, the torpedoes, the G7E, electric. The early ones were steam, the G7A. They left a wake of bubbles. If you fired one in the day, the destroyer saw the line, pointing right back at you. Here I am, kill me. So we loved the G7E, no bubbles. But they were temperamental beasts. They had batteries that needed to be warmed 30 degrees Celsius. That was the magic number. If the torpedo was too cold, the battery efficiency dropped. It wouldn't reach the target, so we had to pull them out of the tubes every few days to maintain them. Imagine this. The boat is rolling 30 degrees. The floor is wet steel, and you have to drag a 7-meter-long, 1.5-ton cylinder out of a tube. It swings. It crushes fingers. We greased the runners. We checked the depth settings. We checked the pistols, the detonators, magnetic or impact. Early in the war, they failed. You would hit a tanker, thump, and nothing. A dud. You risked your life to get into position, you fired, and the torpedo just bounced off. It was heartbreaking, but by 43, they worked. Too well. When you fired, the boat jumped. The weight loss, 1.5 tons leaving the bow, upset the trim. The bow would shoot up. You had to flood the tanks immediately to compensate. Flood forward! Keep her down! If the bow broke the surface, you were dead. Everything was a balance. Weight, pressure, air, the toilet, the head. It sounds funny, but it was a serious tactical problem. We had 2 toilets, but one was used to store food, cans of bread, tins of ham. So 50 men shared one toilet. And you couldn't just flush it. If you are underwater, the outside pressure is higher than the inside pressure. If you open the valve, the ocean comes in. And it doesn't stop. So there was a complicated system of levers and valves. First, you pump the waste into a chamber. Then you close the bowl valve. Then you open the C valve. Then you use high-pressure air to blow the waste out. Then you close the C valve. If you did it in the wrong order, the U-boat baptism, a jet of sewage and seawater hits you in the face. And worse, it could sink the boat. So only the sanitary specialist was allowed to operate it deep down. Imagine that being your job. Most of the time, we just used a bucket. We carried the bucket through the boat, past the officers, to the galley, to empty it in the bilge or eject it. Dignity? There is no dignity in a steel tube. There is only function. You eat, you sleep, you work, you wait. The food was good at first. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread. The Navy wanted to keep us happy, but after 2 weeks, the bread molded. We cut the green parts off and ate the rest. The potatoes sprouted. The meat tasted like diesel. Everything tasted like diesel. Even the coffee, especially the coffee, we drank liters of it to stay awake. But it couldn't wash the taste of oil out of your mouth. It was in your pores. You want to know the scariest thing? It wasn't the depth charges. It wasn't the drowning. It was the boredom. Days and days of nothing, staring at a gauge, polishing a handle that is already clean, reading the same book for the 10th time, thinking. That is dangerous. If you think too much, you start to ask why. And there is no answer. Why am I here? Why am I trying to kill men I have never met? Why are they trying to kill me? We were young. We were patriotic. We believed in the fatherland. But at 150 meters, there is no fatherland. There is only the boat. The boat is your country. The captain is your Führer. The man next to you is your brother. And the ocean is the enemy of all of you, British, American, German. The ocean doesn't care. It just wants to crush you. And eventually, for most of us, it did. I am one of the lucky ones. But sometimes I don't feel lucky. I feel like a ghost who forgot to die. So listen to me. When you see the war movies, when you see the glory, remember the smell, remember the cold, remember the silence, and remember this. Let's talk about the heart of the beast, the Man M 6V40/46 diesels, 6 cylinders, supercharged, 2,800 horsepower. They were monsters. When they were running, the engine room was a chaotic storm of noise and heat. The pistons were the size of buckets. The rockers danced, clack, 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 clack. We didn't have ear protection. You lost your hearing. It was part of the job. But you could feel the rhythm. If a cylinder misfired, you felt it in your feet before you heard it. We had to nurse them constantly. Oil pressure, cooling water temperature. If the cooling intake clogged with ice or jellyfish, the temperature spiked in seconds. You had to react. And the exhaust valves, they carboned up. We had to clean them, sometimes at sea. Stripping down a cylinder head while the boat is rocking in a storm? That is an art. One dropped nut, one lost washer, and the engine is dead. And if the engine is dead, you can't charge the batteries. If you can't charge the batteries, you can't dive. If you can't dive, you are a target practice for the RAF. So you worked. You worked until your fingers bled, until you were so tired you hallucinated. I remember seeing my mother standing next to the supercharger once. She handed me a wrench. I took it. It was real. She wasn't. That's Blechkoller. The tin can madness. It starts with visions, then paranoia, then you scream. We had a kid, a radio operator. He started screaming about spiders. He said the boat was full of spiders. He tried to open the hatch. We were at 100 meters. We had to tie him to his bunk. He screamed for 2 days. Then he stopped. He just stared at the wall. He never spoke again. When we got back to port, they took him away in a white truck. He was one of the casualties. No shrapnel, no wounds, just a broken mind. You have to understand what we were up against. The escort groups, Walker, Gretton, the British captains, they were professionals. They developed tactics, the creeping attack. One ship stays back, keeping sonar contact. Ping, ping. It guides the other ship. The attacking ship runs in silent, engines off, drifting. You don't hear him coming. You are listening to the pinger. You think he is far away. Then, splash. The depth charges are right on top of you. It was terrifyingly smart. And the aircraft, the Black May of 1943. Suddenly we couldn't surface. The Liberators were everywhere. The Sunderlands. They had the lee light, a massive searchlight under the wing. You are running on the surface at night, recharging. Absolute darkness. Then, click. A sun turns on, blinding white light, and then the cannon fire, and the depth charges. You have seconds. Alarm! You dive, but the boat is slow to dive. The stern goes down, but the conning tower is still exposed. I saw a boat, U-456, get hit as she dove. The bomb hit the casing. She broke in half. We saw it through the periscope, the bow and the stern both pointing at the sky. Then they slid under. No survivors. That was our reality. We were fighting ghosts. Radar we couldn't see. Sonar we couldn't hide from. Codes that were broken. We didn't know about Enigma. We didn't know they were reading our mail. We just knew that everywhere we went, they were waiting. How do they know? We asked. Spies? No, it was math and machines. We were fighting a war of numbers, and we were losing. But in that steel tube, there was something else. Kameradschaft, comradeship. It is a word civilians use lightly. For us, it was physical. You knew the smell of every man. You knew who snored, who farted, who cried in his sleep. You knew who had a girl back home, who had no one. We shared everything. If one man got a package from home, sausage, chocolate, cigarettes, it was divided by 50. We were a single organism. The officers weren't distant aristocrats. They ate the same moldy bread. They used the same bucket. The captain was a god, yes, but he was our god. He knew our names. He touched our shoulders. Good work, machinery. That was enough. You would die for him. And you did. I remember the Christmas of '43. We were submerged off the coast of Ireland. We had a tiny artificial tree. We sang Stille Nacht, silent, night, in the torpedo room, surrounded by instruments of death, singing about peace. It was absurd. It was beautiful. Men crying, tough men, killers, weeping for home. For a moment, the war was gone. The smell was gone. We were just boys, far away from home, scared of the dark. Then the red light flashed. Battle stations, and we put the masks back on. The human face disappeared. We became gears again. History calls us the gray wolves, predators, and we were. We sank ships. We killed sailors. I saw a tanker burn once. We torpedoed it at night. The fuel caught fire. The sea was on fire. I saw men jumping into the burning water. I saw them swimming, screaming. We watched. We didn't help. We couldn't. If we surfaced to help, we would be sunk. So we watched them burn. I see their faces sometimes, blackened, screaming. They ask me, why? I have no answer. It was war. But that is not an answer. It is an excuse. We were monsters in a steel belly, but we were also victims, trapped in a cycle of kill or be killed, sent out by old men in Berlin who never smelled the diesel, who never heard the hull pop. They looked at maps. We looked at death. And in the end, the ocean took them all. The ocean is the only winner. It cleans everything, the oil, the blood, the steel. It swallows it all and leaves nothing but silence, the crushing, heavy silence. That is the legacy of the U-boat, not the victories, not the tonnage sunk, but the silence. The empty space where 50 men used to be, the iron coffins. They are still down there, rusting, waiting, and I am here, speaking to you, a voice from the grave, telling you what it was like. So you don't have to go there, so you never have to hear the ping. Listen to the water, listen to the hum of the world, and be grateful. Be grateful you can smell the grass. Be grateful you can see the sun. Be grateful you are dry, because out there, deep down, it is cold and it is dark, and you don't hear the one that gets you.